episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest today with some really fascinating topics that we have not yet gotten into on this show. Involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Sakhrat Khizroev, professor of electrical and computer engineering at the College of Engineering, University of Miami. He has a secondary appointment in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the Miller School of Medicine there. And his laboratory conducts research on nanomagnetics and spintronic applications, ranging everything from energy-efficient information processing to precision medicine. From 2011 to 2018, he was a tenured professor of electrical and computer engineering at Florida International University, joint appointment at the College of Medicine, where he co-founded and spearheaded the university-wide initiative in personalized medicine. And prior to that, from 2006 to 2011, he was tenured professor of electrical engineering at the University of California, Riverside. Prior to joining academia, he spent 4 years as a research staff member at Seagate Research and a year as a doctoral intern with IBM Almaden Research Center. His team, in collaboration with Professor Ping Liang at UC-Riverside, for the first time proposed and developed magnetoelectric nanoparticles for medical applications, including targeted drug delivery across the blood-brain barrier, cancer treatments, HIV, neuroimaging, and even wireless neural network stimulation, among other applications. They also proposed and developed a multi-level 3D magnetic memory device and nano lasers for future information processing, which is extremely well known for, which has resulted in the multi-billion-dollar data storage industry's shift towards perpendicular magnetic recording. In 2012, he was elected a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, the inaugural year of the Academy. He's graduated over 22 PhD students, holds dozens of U.S. patents, and has authored over 150 refereed papers, book and book chapters, presented over 100 talks at many high-profile seminars and colloquia internationally. Dr. Khizroev received his PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University, his master's in physics from University of Miami, and his bachelor's and master's degree in physics from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. Dr. Khizroev, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us today for a little while.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you.
It's great having you. I'd love to start things off as we typically do, just by handing you the floor for a few minutes, just to talk a little bit more about yourself. If you could take us back a little further than I went, everything from sort of where you grew up, when you first developed your interest in these fascinating areas of physics and electronics, and a little bit of those early days. I think that'd be a great way to start things off and what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was born in Makhachkala in 1970. Makhachkala is a city in southern Russia, in North Caucasus. Okay. So then I went to school in college, Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, where I focused on physics. And like most of the physics guys, electrical engineering guys, I always loved science, building little robots at home, computers, etc. That's a standard path. Yeah. And also I went through personal experience when I could not see for some time. When I was in my early 20s, yeah. I had a little accident, and that's when I really got into my passion came to really apply physics to understand how the human body works. You could see that our brain is a very complex machine made of electric signals and so on, etc., etc. It's a computer. So, so I was driven to understand how the computer works, the brain computer. So that motivated me in science.
Outstanding. And it's very interesting when I read sort of your profile on the internet, you have this tagline. It says that you and your laboratory, you endeavor to invent technologies which are at least 10 years ahead of their time, which I think is awesome. It's such a forward-looking frontier model of how to. It speaks to the nature of the things you're working with, and we rarely hear or have heard on the show terms like spintronics and nanomagnetics. I printed out sort of the Wikipedia definitions of these things ahead of time. I understand you lecture on this all the time, and I'm not looking, to ask you for an hour-long lecture, but could you take us for a few minutes on sort of a high school level definition of what nanomagnetics and spintronics are all about? And we'll get into the health side of it in the follow-up questions, but take us on a little journey there, if you would.
All right, yeah, no problem. Spintronics, it comes from the word spin, electron spin. So we all are familiar with the modern semiconductor industry. The computer industry relies on using semiconductors, all right? And in semiconductors, what we do, we manipulate electric charge, electron charge. Charge can be stored in a capacitor. It's there, it's yes, binary yes. If it's not there, it's binary no. In a very simplistic, trivial formulation.
Sure.
So we never took advantage of another physical property called spin. That electron has another property. It's called spin. It's because it rotates. Physicists are not going to like this formulation. Again, it's a very high-level description. The electron rotates around its own axis.
Sure.
Electron is a charge, so as a result, you have and that property is called spin. Mm-hmm. The rotation is spinning around its own axis. So we never took advantage of that to make our devices, to store information, to manipulate. And spintronics is a relatively new field, been around for a couple of decades at least, mm-hmm. With the goal to take advantage of this new physics we never exploited before. And possibilities there are quite unprecedented. As first of all, spin is a quantum mechanical concept. It can be described only by quantum physics, which is, again, there is no analogy to it. What means you can have only discrete values of it. Remember the Schrödinger paradox. Cat is alive and dead at the same time. So that spin is a very nice model to describe that process. So it's not easy to make it work, but it definitely it's going to happen. There are already applications based on spin, and in fact, in one of the most mature industries, data storage industries, magnetic data storage industries, the way they read information in a hard disk from a disk relies on using the physical spin. Mm-hmm. So just again, I'll stop here, not to get into details. Yeah.
No.
But it has more than that. So spintronic. Why is spintronic such a big thing? You all heard of quantum computing.
Sure.
Quantum computing is the next generation computing paradigm. Most promising and most powerful in terms of computing, right? And spintronics is probably one of the most reliable ways to make it happen. By taking advantage of the quantum physics of the spin, of the electron spin. That's why it's such an important field.
Excellent. Excellent. And then, so continuing along that path, so, you write about how obviously, and I come out of the sort of the pharmaceutical industry, and our space has been heavily dominated sort of in the field of biotech for the last, 100 years or so, with sort of at the molecular level, biomolecules, proteins, and so forth. The physics component of that, a lot less so, but as you're pointing out, inside here, and obviously membrane potentials across the body, we are an electrical being, we are a magnetic being, and obviously people watching the show, listening, know about sort of CAT scans and NMR and things of this nature. Talk a little bit, if you would, because you write about obviously the benefits. There's benefits to biomolecular stuff, but a lot of downside. When it comes to looking at the smaller, going deeper now to electrons and magnetic spins and so forth in the human body, what are some of the advantages? Talk a little bit about that physics and that physiological microenvironment that you talk about, which is smaller, less explored, but has a lot of potential that sort of the larger biomolecule space does not. Take us a little bit on that, if you would.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely a very important question. Biology has been the driving force in medicine until today. It's obvious, right? Biology at the same time describes all the phenomena, physiological mechanisms at a relatively high level. Even when we say molecular level, it's still a relatively high level. There is level under it. Definitely, we want the more fundamental knowledge we have, the better control of treatments, diseases we can get, right? That's obvious. So the physics provides you that control. And the physics can go beyond, can look under. So by doing this, by achieving a more fundamental control of biological mechanisms, we can treat diseases much better and with much less and maybe no side effects. Ideally, that's our dream, and it's going to happen sooner or later. Obviously, we're progressing, advancing. That's where we want to be. And I think it's important to mention here, interesting historically how academia has been. Obviously, we know that most discoveries have come from academia, from basic research, from researchers who think that I want to do something which will happen, like you said, at least 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. So I want to be at least 10 years ahead of time. From dreamers, right? We have to dream to come up with something. It doesn't mean everything we dream of will happen, but at least even a small fraction of it happens, we'll win. And so. But the reality is academia has been like this. Probably one of the main things in academia, the saying that jack of all trades, a master of none, been quite important in academia. Academicians were proud of knowing one field very well, being experts in it. And usually that's exactly what it was. Biologists, in certain mechanisms, they're focused on that. Physicists studying certain solid state phenomena focused on that particular solid state phenomena, focusing on little micro defects in one particular material. Today it's becoming clear, and the human body is a perfect example of it. That's not enough. We definitely have to go interdisciplinary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that master of none thing is not going to be valid anymore. I mean, it's not going to help us in the future. And of course, scientists are realizing this. And so I want to say that I'm at the University of Miami right now. We have a good, strong team at the University of Miami, and our focus is advanced materials. Mm-hmm. Advanced materials is probably the field, is a true interdisciplinary field, which actually at the front line of this change of the development in academia. So making everything interdisciplinary. So, there are quite a few very strong interdisciplinary programs in the nation. And of course, examples are UC Santa Barbara, University of Chicago Molecular Engineering Institute, University of Florida, quite a few. But still, it's a relatively new development. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do at the University of Miami right now is to take advantage of this interdisciplinary approach of material science, mm-hmm. and focus on something which is already built, which already exists at the University of Miami on the existing strengths. Mm-hmm. We have machine learning, data sciences, we have very strong medical school, Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, and many other efforts. We have the very strong Atmospheric Sciences Institute, so it's dealing with pollution, environment, etc. So we want to figure out how we actually can use this interdisciplinary approach in material science to solve fundamental problems like this. And I'm not going to go far into all these applications. I'm not an expert in all these applications. And our focus, again, is physics,
Sure.
And building devices based on physics. But what we're understanding right now, it's very important to connect to somebody who is very strong in applications. And medicine is definitely, probably for us right now, it's a perfect example. As I told you, we've been passionate of figuring out how to treat diseases, particularly in the brain. A very complex system. The brain is a very complicated electric circuit, and the reality is today, scientists don't really have a fundamental approach to treat diseases in the brain. The reason for this is brain is such a complex system made of billions of these neurons, 80 billion neurons, right? They all interact with each other through electric signals called action potentials.
Yep.
And that's definitely not pure biology. That's more, I would say, electrical engineering, signals, et cetera, et cetera. So there has been good realization of this, but what we as material scientists right now trying to achieve at the University of Miami, we're actually trying to use that interdisciplinary approach of material science and connect to the right people. In this case, it's physicists, not just biologists and neuroscientists, it's physicists, signal processing guys. That's where our collaborator, Dr. Ping Liang from in the past from UC-Riverside, our cell nanomed comes in, very strong signal processing expert. And we're looking at the brain as that circuit, as I told, this electrical engineering circuit, and trying to understand how we can write and read information from individual neurons in the brain without damaging the brain. What it gives you, it gives you the ability to look, to identify, to diagnose a disease in the brain and treat it on the fly. So to do this, it's what I just said is pretty simple. But to do this, you need that, what you said, the ability to understand biology at the very submolecular level. To control neural firing, to record neural firing, and nanotechnology and advanced materials is definitely the way to go. So this is the focus of our research. I don't want to get into detail unless you ask me questions.
It's completely fascinating, and I was trying to immerse myself, obviously, in some of your papers beforehand, and I sort of, and if this is not right, then we can do it any way you want. I sort of have divided things up to sort of therapeutic type stuff over here, and then, although it's therapeutic, I wanted to talk about brain-computer interfacing separately. But if you could continue about where we just were, because I was completely fascinated. So we have now, you sort of described this electric field-driven nanoscale approaches. A core component of that, what you're developing, these magnetoelectric nanoparticles. Obviously, this is highly advanced and probably a lot of confidential stuff here. But I envision sort of, lots of little nano devices going in the brain and doing something cool. Take us into neurodegenerative diseases. Obviously, you can go anywhere, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's Parkinson's. But if you want to take us on a little example that doesn't violate any confidentiality, but what you're thinking about, obviously, whether it's today or 10 years from now, I think you could tell a really cool story there.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah. So you're correct. Yeah, exactly. There are many possibilities there. So I'll give one example,
please.
One simple example. So brain is the brain is CPU, right? Of the human body. We know that very well. The way brain works is very impressive. The brain in idle mode consumes about less than 20 watts of power. To compare, to do the same type of calculations for a regular binary computer we use today, it will take about 7 megawatts. Mega means million watt, right? Almost 6 orders of magnitude more power. So imagine if we could build a machine which works like a brain, a computer which can work like a brain. I'm not even going to start where it will bring us, the computing power of the computation based on the computing architecture of the brain.
Yeah.
We have no idea how the brain works. That's the reality. And one of the reasons we don't know how the brain works is it's very difficult. Today we don't know how to do it. We cannot look at the signal propagation pathways in the brain. So imagine there are 80 billion neurons in the brain, and they communicate with each other. Everything they do is quite complex. It's very collective. There are many hypotheses what is the brain-computer architecture. Again, we have no clue, and it's mostly mathematical theories. One of them claims that the brain most likely is not even working in three-dimensional space. It's some 10 or 12-dimensional space, and then our brain has the ability to reflect that information in multi-dimensional space, in our dimensional space, and et cetera, et cetera. That's why it's so fast and so powerful. And so we definitely will not imagine the brain is a result of billions of years of evolution. That's how we look at it.
Sure.
Yeah, of course, we're not going to compete with nature. No, there is no chance in our lifetime we'll be able to understand, to figure out on our own how the brain works. So the only way for us, one approach for us, is to actually try to get inside the brain and see what actually happens there, how the neurons communicate. That's also not easy to say, extremely difficult to do because the signals are electric field driven. It's literally electric currents, like in electric circuit, like in the computer, like in the CPU. And so it means we have to deal with electric field sources and detectors. So we have to be able to attach wires to all the neurons to be able to actually look at the signal, to pick up the electric voltages coming from individual neurons or drive currents and monitor what actually happens to neurons when we do that. Imagine 80 billion neurons. You're not going to have 80 billion wires protruding from your brain. That's not going to happen. Definitely, the only way realistically to do it is wirelessly. But that's a major fundamental physics challenge.
Okay.
The reason is brain being so electric field driven. Imagine the complexity of the whole thing. 80 billion, again, I keep repeating that. So now, if you want to tap into signals coming from each neuron, you have to, from specific neurons, some neuron number 2 billion something,
right.
You have to address this neuron without experiencing interference from all the other neurons. With electric fields, that's not possible. Yeah. Electric fields cannot be used to do it wirelessly. You cannot do it. That's why they attach electrodes today if they want to stimulate brain, etc., etc. By the way, there's actually well-known certain diseases like Parkinson's and so on. The best way to treat them is not by therapies, not by drugs, but by actually stimulating.
Stimulation, sure.
We don't know exactly what's actually happening there, what's the mechanism underlying, but experience and so on, all the research shows that that's the best way to do it. Even depression, major depression, which is a serious problem today in the society, the best way to treat it, not with drugs, is by electrical stimulation. The mechanisms of it are not well known, but the results have been studied more or less today. And definitely that's a way to go. We understand that. But the problem is how to do that without wires. That's a challenge. So that's why we need physics here. And material science, advanced material science, I'll tell you. In fact, the material science we're dealing with is called material science of intelligent materials. I'll explain you what it means. So now, we figured out electric fields cannot be used on their own to actually control and read back information from individual neurons with no wires. You cannot do that. But we know very well you can use magnetic fields. Magnetic fields, different fields, right? Magnetic fields, they can be used. That's the reason today we have diagnostic techniques based on magnetic resonance imaging and others, magnetic particle imaging, so, et cetera, et cetera. So in MRI machines, they apply very relatively large fields on the order of a few Tesla. These are Teslas are units of magnetic fields, and several Teslas are huge magnetic fields. Relatively, it's all relative, right? It's huge compared to what? Relatively large fields. So Food and Drug Administration, FDA, approves application of fields like this. So it's not going to damage the brain. It's not going to do anything bad to us. And the magnetic field easily goes through the brain without affecting the electric circuitry of the brain. So now that's the physics problem we have to solve. How we can connect magnetic fields, which can easily go through the brain wirelessly, we control them wirelessly, with electric fields, which ensure very intrinsic control of neurons at the single neuron or even sub-neuron level. That's the physics problem we have to solve. And the solution is that what I just told you, advanced materials, intelligent nanostructures, intelligent nanoparticles. Why they're called intelligent? They're intelligent. Advanced materials are materials which are sensitive to relatively minute changes of the microenvironment. In this case, that minute change is the electric field because of a neural activity of one neuron, or actually of a subneuronal region. And if you have materials which can pick up that electric field and convert the energy carried by this electric field into magnetic fields, then you can use existing tools, magnetic field sources, which are already available today, to record information from the brain wirelessly at the single neuron level. And vice versa, you can, if you see something is not working properly, you can fix it. Fix it, that means treat diseases, Parkinson's, depression, and many others, Alzheimer's, and quite a few others. Autism, it's definitely, we all know that diseases, but that's the fundamental approach. And so that's how we came up with the concept of magnetoelectric nanoparticles. The idea of magnetoelectric nanoparticles was to reverse engineer the brain first. That's how we started. Dr. Lang, Ping Lang for UC-Riverside and I were talking about this, and he's a signal processing guy. He identified the problem, and we offered the solution at that time. So this is actually a perfect example of how material science works. It's a true interdisciplinary field, extremely successful today as the time shows. And this is actually one example which shows the power of interdisciplinary research. So we figured out that there are nanostructures called magnetoelectric materials which actually do that. They use quantum physics to convert magnetic fields transmitted, controlled wirelessly, into electric fields at the nanoscale region, literally at the atomic level. So by placing these particles close to neurons, you can control electric fields due to neurons. You can excite neurons at the single neuron level or even subneuronal level. They're very small. That's all. We're dealing with atomic level here. And you can also record back the information from the neurons. So you can see if neurons communicate properly, you can write back information. Remember, I told you our big challenge was to figure out how the brain works and build a computer very similar to it. So that's actually a very reliable pathway to this. So by using this power of advanced materials, intelligent materials, we can figure out how the signals are propagated. Again, I'm missing lots of very complex details. They're actually very complex to me too, because it's such a complex signal processing. That's where our partnership comes into play. But what we do, we're doing experiments. We're doing quite successful experiments. We can record back and write back information to fix the defected parts of the electric circuit of the brain. And hopefully one day we'll figure out what is that computing architecture of the brain. And that will be a major advance, of course,
Yeah, I mean, the things that stand out to me, of course, the specificity, of course, of how, specific, again, we mentioned, neuron 2,000,046 has a problem, but at the same time, this amazing, you keep going to this 80 billion number, and just when you start thinking of things that, once again, now we're getting to the brain-machine interface concepts, and you talk about moving things both ways, intelligence and learning. I had the opportunity to a couple of folks actually. About a year ago, I spent some time with Alan Mondi at DARPA, once again talking about sort of wireless, but then also I spent some times with the folks at the Air Force that have this eye-neural system where they're looking, you know, how can we get more stuff going the other direction to teach someone how to to fly an airplane in 6 months versus a year, you know, all this type. When you start thinking of some of these brain-machine interface concepts, obviously looking out, but what are the you know, obviously on one hand, you got the diseases, but then moving large amounts of information out and in, there's a lot of there's a lot of really neat science fiction.
Oh, yes.
Potentially.
Yeah,
what are some of the things you dream about there?
Today it sounds like sci-fi, but it will happen. That's how science moves forward, you know, right? It's gonna happen for sure. It will happen. And
what are the things that like you dream about in terms? Dream about, but things that you, wow, maybe not 10 years, but 15. You know, can I read this book in 1 minute and get it all in there?
Can I learn a language in less than a minute?
Exactly.
That's gonna happen. That's definitely will happen. But it's difficult to imagine about all the possibilities. But it's definitely gonna happen. Whether we want it or we don't want it, it's beyond us, of course. You know, it's definitely science is moving in that direction. And we hope that it all will come to good. Yeah, exactly. That's why we're very careful, by the way. When we do the science, we always make sure that it's all ethical and it's all correct. And so
Sure, not completely. You know, so moving beyond the nervous system for a bit. I mean, obviously, you know, other ideas that you have, you know, think about cancer as an example. You know, we talked on a show a couple of months ago with Mike Levin up at Tufts. He's working more on the bioelectricity front of things, but you know, he talks about how, you know, this normal cell here, a membrane potential can be a little different, and all of a sudden you have a tumor cell. There's nothing genetically that's changed, but you've changed an electrical component of that
That's
cell.
True.
Talk a little bit about some of these non-neural tissues and maybe some of the vision you have for nanomagnetism there.
Yeah. You know, this connection I was just talking about, the brain was an example, the best example where we could apply it, right? The connection, that interdisciplinary approach, and the smart material, in this case, magnetoelectric nanostructure, the connection between electric and magnetic fields. Remember, magnetic fields do everything wirelessly, easy to do wirelessly, goes through the body, no problem. And electric fields, they determine all this intrinsic control. They are underlying all the intrinsic biological mechanisms in the body. And those mechanisms exist not only in the brain, everywhere, at the cellular level, and we have trillions of those cells in the body. Like you just mentioned, cancer cells, for example, have very different membrane potentials compared to their normal counterparts. For example, ovarian cancer cell. Ovarian cancer cell, the membrane potential can be on the order of, I'll tell you, -5 millivolts. What it means, the difference between the intracellular and extracellular spaces, the electric field difference is about 5 millivolts, approximately, units in volts, right? So for the normal ovarian cell, the healthy counterpart, it's -50 millivolts, so 10 times larger in magnitude. So it's a big difference. So what it means, something medical research has never done before. That's actually an interesting observation, what you said. If you can bring magnetoelectric nanoparticles in the body, what you can do, you can provide that control. You can apply electric fields in that range, what it means, above 5 millivolts. So electric fields, which will give you that voltage difference at the membrane, above 5 millivolts and less than 50 millivolts. I'm talking at a very high level, very approximately, guys. So what it means, in this case, we can break the barrier to go through the membrane of the cancer cells and without affecting the surrounding normal cells. That's the specificity you're talking about. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. We do experiments on this. We actually work with a ovarian cancer expert, Dr. Carol Aranovich, on this together. We did a few studies on this quite successfully, and hopefully we'll continue this. We're actually trying to continue this right now. Yeah, you're right.
Excellent. Very exciting.
And of course, being this mechanism is so fundamental, it can be applied to all the cancers, to everything. Eventually, it will be.
That's it. It's such a because we've been so genome centric, the last couple of decades, but we seem to forget that there's a lot of stuff that happens across these trillions of cells that has nothing to do with gene changes. There's other physiological mechanisms.
Exactly, and it's not undermining gene therapies. It's actually complementary to those therapies.
Absolutely.
So it can go together. It can definitely further advance exactly this approach. Again, it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm I'm on board. Sakhrat, taking a step away from sort of what I know a little bit about medicine and biomedicine, but I still find these topics fascinating. You at the very beginning when you were introducing us to Spintronics, you mentioned quantum computing, and then you briefly mentioned you alluded to the concept of neuromorphic computing, sort of how we ultimately build a brain-like computer, a little different thing. Compare those things. Because I know there's initiatives around the world, in the US I'm familiar with, on both of these fronts. Do neuromorphic computing and quantum computing compete with each other? Are they just give us a couple of minutes on to it, because I know you're interested in both, but where do they both sit in sort of the future of computing?
The reason we're interested in both, they are alternating. Actually, there are three major paradigms, computing architecture paradigms of the future coming up right now. And I would say quantum computing is number one in significance. Neuromorphic computing number two in significance today. It doesn't mean that's reality tomorrow, though. And the third one is something very close to the current architecture in process memory. In memory processing, so memory and processing are done in one unit. That's very close to the modern computing architecture. So those are three computing paradigms, paradigm shifts believed to be happening today. So quantum computing is Spintronics is one example of it to implement quantum computing. Right, it's purely based on quantum physics. Right now, there are many announcements. Okay, we showed, we demonstrated quantum entanglement in a process like this. Quantum entanglement is a foundation, is a core of this. You have to demonstrate things like this. I think I'm not an expert to say that, guys. Let me tell you, we are very much interested in this. We're working to bring our own implementation of it, but I don't think I am qualified to make statements like this, but I'll just give you my opinion. I'll just give you my opinion. Quantum computing will, quantum computing will compete with neuromorphic computing. No, I don't think they will compete. They have their own path. They will go forward themselves independently. Their pros and cons, and we are still far from understanding which one will happen first. Quantum computing, I would say, is more popular today. There are more announcements about quantum computing. People taking it more and more seriously. Larger companies are involved, Google, IBM, quite a few others. So neuromorphic computing is not at that level. But I personally think neuromorphic computing has a stronger potential to happen in the near future. The reason is we know the neuromorphic computing works. Our brain actually works. We just have to figure out how it works. So, and by doing what I was just telling you, bridging those advanced materials, advances with the brain, I think that's going to be instrumental. That will be the key to the success. To making it happen. Quantum computing, it's most likely it's going to happen. Definitely, it's already happening. People perform certain operations with quantum gates, but in actual quantum computing, when and it will happen and in which form is still an open question. But for some reason, not for some reason, definitely it deserves that hype it has today. It's a very hot field today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so why are we doing both? Let me tell you. It's a neuromorphic computing. Remember, our approach to neuromorphic computing, or to brain-like computing to be precise, is to figure out how our brain works.
Right.
And try to imitate it as closely as possible to build a computer which works like a brain. It's very likely the concepts of quantum computing exist in the brain. The parallel computation, et cetera, most likely our brain already does it. You know, that's why we're very much interested in quantum computing as well.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? So we want to know quantum computing very well to be able to build that brain-like computer we're trying to build. Yeah. That knowledge of quantum computing, and we're following on the progress in the field of quantum computing. It will help us to build the first neuromorphic computing as well. Definitely. I'm not going to get into detail here, but definitely there are some overlapping parts there as well.
Absolutely.
All the pathways are independent. They're complementary, and they do. But which one will happen first? It's still an open question. Yeah.
But now looping that, and sorry, I'll go one more esoteric place, and then we'll come back. But so in the other room here, I have a pet bird. And it's well known nowadays that he has these little things in his eyes, the magnetoreceptors, that allow him to see all sorts of interesting stuff that I cannot as a human see. And this is one of the themes that gets spoken a lot about as an example of so-called quantum biology, and understanding sort of the quantum nature of whether it's magnetoreception or olfaction or all these other things that happen really fast and precisely. What do you think? Obviously, this is a little more esoteric a question, but obviously you're going to be focusing a lot on how the brain works. But what about our learning about how the mind? I don't mean to go this way, but how the mind works, where it is it in here? Is it out there somewhere? Take us. Do you think about quantum biology at all, and what we are going to be learning in the next 10 years and beyond from some of these more esoteric biologic concepts?
Yeah, we'll definitely learn a lot. That's for sure. You asked a very important question, very difficult question. That's the reason I said we're actually studying neuromorphic computing and quantum computing at the same time. Yep. Quantum biology is most likely real. It's there. So hopefully we'll figure out something. Yep. But it's just how the mind works and so on, how it's connected to this quantum biology. This is beyond me. This is way beyond.
Me too, but I thought I'd give it to someone smarter than me.
Like my colleague Ping Liang says, one thing at a time. Just sure. we'll talk when we get closer there. That's definitely. I understand it's a big thing. It's a very big thing. That's all I can tell you.
Gotcha. Yeah, I appreciate that. I just thought I'd give it to somebody that's really smart. But
I'm not that smart.
Sakhrat, well, we're getting to the near the end of our hour here. I want to, as we typically do, give you back the floor. Obviously, you've been all over the place in terms of engineering, in terms of biomedicine, met endless amount of fascinating people along the way in industry and academia. Take a few minutes, if you would, to shout out, to mention anyone, mentors, influencers, your current lab that are just really important, have been important or continue to be important in your career. Take the floor. Anyone you want to mention specifically that's going to be instrumental in the next decade or so of making all this happen for us.
Yeah. As I think already I mentioned, I think the future progress is based on interactions like never before. That's the key, of course, Yep. And I personally worked with my colleague, friend Ping Liang, a major world-renowned expert in signal processing, for the last more than a decade for sure. Since 2006, 15 years now. And so in my lab, we have about 10 people right now. They all come from different backgrounds: physics, biology, neuroscience, engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, mathematicians. And each of them contributes equally, I would say, equally to the progress. So it definitely, everything we do should be credited to the entire team. You know, it's a so I've been very lucky to have a team which works hand in hand, and so the future progress is strongly dependent on the ability to build such teams. I think, you know, that's very important. So another thing I want to mention is, by the way, the most recent advances in the field are very important. Driven by, I would say, importantly by chemical engineers. Chemical engineering is an interesting field. It's a field. It's a very important. It's a chemical engineer is a chemist, is an engineer. So what it means, chemist is a basic scientist. Sure. At the same time, he knows how to build actual practical machines out of these materials, right? Sure. And not every university today has a department of chemical engineering, but such an important field, I think every engineering school should have it. And we were very lucky to have good chemical engineers right now. In my group, we have PhD graded students who have electrical engineers, chemical engineers. And particularly, I would like to mention the Elliot Zhang, who has a background, chemical engineering, something I definitely would like to credit. I was very fortunate to work with a senior chemist who spearheaded a chemical engineering effort at the UC-Riverside, Professor Robert Haddon. Rest in peace. Fortunately, passed away a few years ago. Visionary guy who played an important role to build programs like what we're doing right now. So I definitely would like to mention his name, Professor Robert Haddon of UC-Riverside. Gotcha. Late Professor Robert Haddon. Yeah.
Wonderful. It's a fascinating journey, and I really I'm going to be excited following you the next 10 years. Hopefully inventing these technologies before the next 10 years, but really, really amazing stuff. For everybody that's going to be watching this particular episode on the YouTube channel or listening on across the podcast, you've been listening to Dr. Sakhrat Khizroev, Professor Electrical and Computer Engineering, College of Engineering at the University of Miami. He is that secondary appointment in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology over at their Miller School of Medicine. Sakhrat, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule on the holiday to come talk to us. Thank you for everything you're doing down there. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through these programs, this research. Really, really fascinating work. And just want to thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.